Fantrax Fantasy Football Mailbag episode heading into Week 9. With the losses of Cousins plus Stafford in Dynasty, what cheap option at quarterback are you willing to buy, assuming you are contending? So I think in Superflex leagues, Sam Howell is most teams' quarterback 3, or he was rostered to be that. If it's a one-quarterback league and he's rostered, I think he's just a streaming option or was picked up to be that. Looking at the fantasy finishes, though, quarterback 11, quarterback 5, quarterback 8, quarterback 1. He had 397 passing yards and 4 passing touchdowns last week. 388 passing yards back in Week 5. 3 passing touchdowns in Week 6. 40 rushing yards in Week 4. So looking at the fantasy finishes, looking at the signs for upside, I think Sam Howell is more than just a streaming quarterback, and he's probably not super expensive still. Jahan Dotson or Tank Dell rest of season. So Dell had scores weeks 2 and 3 of 20.2 and 25.5 fantasy points, 17 targets across those 2 games, 145 receiving yards in week 3. He had 4 targets this past week following the bye. After those big games, his targets were trending down in general, but he was banged up in week 5 and missed week 6. Jahan Dotson has been relatively quiet this year until week 8. He caught 8 of 10 targets for 108 receiving yards and a touchdown this week, 24.8 fantasy points. The signs were pointing up in week 7 where he earned 8 targets. So that's 18 targets across the last 2 games in his 3rd week of 8-plus targets. Dotson had 5 weeks of 16-plus fantasy points last season as a rookie, and he logged 0 snaps in 5 games due to being banged up. I do think there is a talent gap, just in all honesty. Jahan Dotson, former first-round pick. Tank Dell this year was drafted in round 3. And then we have to look at trends in fantasy football. I don't think Tank Dell is a guy right now necessarily trending up. Can he get back up? Yes, sure. But Jahan Dotson, the last 2 games, is trending up in the right direction. So I'm going to go Jahan Dotson rest of season. With the season about halfway over, are there any playoff stashes you want to get in on within these next couple of weeks? Maybe some defense and special teams or quarterbacks. I think if my roster's in good shape and I'm looking for stashes, I want high-caliber handcuffs that might be available. Elijah Mitchell, Tyler Algier, Tyjae Spears, maybe Dalvin Cook. I'd be looking to stash some running backs that, if they got the work, can be very fantasy relevant. Think the Jags stay status quo out of the bye week. They are winning games, but Lawrence and Ridley have just been meh. I think when you have matchups where the other offense is pretty good and you have to keep up with that other offense, then your offense is going to be good. Or at least might have more volume. So they have the 49ers this week. Houston's coming up. They've been stepping up as an offense. Later they have the Bengals, Browns, and Ravens. So I think in situations where the other team's offense is really producing that day, that's going to force the Jaguars offense to maybe pass the ball through the air more, and that might translate better for Trevor Lawrence and Calvin Ridley. I'm desperate to pick up a steady running back in order to save my season from either side. What do you think of Mike Evans, me for Tony Pollard, them straight up? So I came into the season, and you can find the receipts, much lower on Tony Pollard. He's only had 3 top 12 finishes this season, but he has played every game above 50% of the snaps and all but one at 64+% of the snaps. He has no competition in that backfield. And in redraft, you need to make the playoffs in order to try to win your league. You cannot win your league if you don't make playoffs. So it's necessary to make moves to get there. And if it's going to save your season, like you are saying, then you got to do what you got to do, right? Forget about like Mike Evans' value and Tony Pollard's straight-up value here. If you need a running back to get to the playoffs, then you need to go and trade for a running back. You need to get done these deals in order to make your team more competitive and make your team a contender. So again, with Tony Pollard, if we're just looking at him, no competition, good offense. We've seen good days out of him, so he's not a bad target. But bigger picture is it's fine to lose trades right now. Even if, I were to come on here and say, no, Mike Evans is better. No, I mean, it's fine to lose trades if it means your team is better and it gives you a shot at making the playoffs. With Dobbs, Zach Ertz saw upward of near 30% target share early on in the season, and McBride just exploded last week. Will Hockenson have a fall off or be able to sustain production moving forward? So I think TJ Hockenson is a great talent, right? I think if we're looking for upside, he is an upside tight end. And targets are everything when it comes to the tight end position. So I think he has the talent, he has the upside and an athleticism. He's going to have the targets. Will his ceiling be different going from Kirk Cousins to Josh Dobbs? Yeah, I think so. I do think so. I simply don't think Dobbs is the same quarterback as Kirk Cousins. And I know Kirk Cousins doesn't get a lot of love, but Kirk Cousins has elevated the pass catchers in his system. So yes, I do think, Hockenson takes a hit, but I don't think now we have to trade him away or anything crazy like that. Especially seeing, like you said, the usage of the tight ends and, them having some decent weeks. Staying in Minnesota, with Dobbs going to Minnesota, how would you rank Addison going forward? Thank you, and happy Halloween. This is from yesterday. So I look at Marquise Brown with Dobbs. He had 5 top 25 weeks. He had 4 weeks of 16-plus fantasy points. He scored 15-plus fantasy points 5 times. So I see success with Marquise Brown, maybe not to be like a top 12 guy, but being inside for a lot of those weeks, the top 25, I think is good with Josh Dobbs. And I think that could be the same with Jordan Addison. I think the targets will still be there. I think the player, just like Hollywood Brown, is very talented. So you put those two things together, and he still should be a flex play, and that's what you drafted Jordan Addison to be anyways. Follow us at Fantrax for consistent fantasy football content.